Take a 10mm and remove this ground strap. And remove these two coolant passage plugs. There's one on each head. 10mm. Just pull them out. They're stuck in there with an O-ring. Same thing for the other one. Now it's time to start removing the cylinder head bolts. Remove them in the reverse order of the torque down sequence. So start with these 10mm outer bolts. Then next, the frontmost 10mm bolt. And then next, the second rearmost 10mm. Then the second frontmost 10mm. Then the middle 10mm bolt. Now you can start removing the 15mm bolts. Again, use the reverse of the torque down sequence. I use an impact wrench on the ones that are reachable with impact. These bolts are very tight. Now for the ones the impact wrench can't reach, use a large breaker bar. The next one's going to be the rearmost outside bolt. And switch to a regular ratchet. At this point, the cylinder head's ready to pull off. Just grab hold of it. There's still going to be a little bit of coolant in there. Pull it off. There we go. On the passenger side, remove this battery negative cable, the 15mm deep well socket. Now just put the head on your workbench and inspect the combustion chambers. Look for any nicks and gouges that might indicate that something got in there. Pull the gasket off. Also make sure you're keeping track of these dowel pins. There's 2 in each head. Sometimes they stay in the block, and sometimes they come out with the head. Make sure you know where they are. Now you have to take the head to a machine shop to get resurfaced. Cylinder heads are back from the machine shop. Nice and shiny. Once the head is off, then you can access the lifters. The lifters are held in with this plastic lifter guide. So use a 10mm and remove the single bolt that holds it in. Grab the cartridge, just pull it up. The AFE lifters come out with, and there they are. Pull them out of the guide, just grab them and pull them out. And the standard lifters, they sit in there. Just take a long needle nose pliers and grab them, and then you can pull them out. So the regular, now that's interesting. Interestingly enough, this particular motor has failed on the regular lifters. Ha! How do you like that? That means this thing needs a cam. Maybe. Well, inspect the rollers on all the lifters, including the regular lifters, and look for this deep scoring on the roller, like this one has. It's kind of strange. What would cause that? It must just be a defect in the manufacturing of the lifter, the roller material. Well, might as well check the other one. Pull it out. Other one's good, so that's very strange. So now I have to inspect the cam lobe. Now you're gonna have to rotate the engine so that you can see the peak side of the cam lobe, or the actual lobe itself, because that's what takes the majority of the wear. It's no use looking at the closed side of the cam lobe. Use a 15/16 socket to rotate the crankshaft. Only rotate it clockwise. Get on the crank bolt. It should be very easy to turn. No compression. And that is one flat cam lobe. Yep. This thing needs a cam. Guess we're making a cam replacement video too. Take your new lifters and soak them in oil. Make sure whatever you put them in is very clean. I used these old water bottles. If you do that, make sure they're completely dry. Just let them absorb the oil and let the oil get in all the little crevices. And make sure that they stand up with the push rod end facing up. That way all the air comes out of them. It's especially important to soak the AFM lifters. Now you have to prepare the deck surface for the head gasket. If you have any stray coolant that leaked out of the head and went into these bolt holes, just take a shop vac and vacuum it out. Take some paper towels or shop rags or something, wad them up and stick them inside the lifter galleys so that all the stuff that comes off from the old head gasket doesn't go down in there. Don't worry about plugging the cylinders, so you can always vacuum them out. Same as the coolant passages. Now you just use a razor blade and scrape all the old gasket material off. I know this is time consuming, but this is the best way to do it. Do not use Scotch-Brite or any kind of aluminum oxide based abrasive, because what that does is it gets little micro aluminum particles that find their way into your bearings, and then before you know it, you're doing the bottom end. So Just take the little bit of extra time it takes to do this with a razor. If you have an aluminum block, be especially careful with a razor, because you don't want to dig in. Aluminum is a very soft metal. And it's easy to gouge. Just make sure you've scraped every square millimeter of this deck surface. And go over it. Got 3 or 4 times. There's always a little tiny piece that you missed. Be especially scrutinous of the areas between coolant passages and cylinders. Make sure you get along this top rail too. Take your shop vac and get all the stuff that got into the cylinders, coolant jackets, and bolt holes, and even around the lifter galleys. Now pull the paper towel wads out of the lifter galleys. And vacuum those out too, just in case anything got in there. Now do the exact same process for the other side. Take some compressed air and blow through all the AFM lifter oil galleys. Do that for each of them. That way, if there's any sludge, it'll blow it out of the lifter galleys. Good. Do that for all of them. Make sure you're not reusing the old lifter guides, because they are a wearable item. Just go get replacements. Now you have to install the lifters into the lifter guides. Each lifter guide contains 2 AFM lifters and 2 regular lifters. The AFM side is obviously different. It's got these raised notches. The AFM lifters only go in one way. If you look along the bore, you'll see that notch. That notch has to line up with the slot in the lifter guide, so just push it through the bottom. Get it in there, make sure it guides into the slot. That is extra important because it lines up the oil hole with the feed hole, with the oil feed galley in the block. Now get the second lifter, same thing. Line up the slot like that, and this lifter guide holds the lifters in place. Now install your 2 non-AFM lifters. You might get confused as to what direction to point the oil hole. It doesn't really matter because it's a 360-degree oil galley, but I like to just make them face the rear of the block. I've never had problems doing that. So you'll notice that there's flats in the top of the lifter that gotta correspond to the flats in the lifter guide. So put those in there. Now install the next one. Put that in there. Alright, now go drop that in the block. Now these lifter guides are unique in that they're for one part of the block. Make sure that this notch corresponds to the notch in the block, that raised portion. And every AFM lifter has this feed hole raised for the valve lifter oil manifold. So drop this in, oil holes on the AFM lifters are facing the top, and the oil holes on the regular lifters are facing the back of the block. Just drop those into place. Just kind of wiggle it until they go down, then until they bottom out. Should the lifter guide's sitting flat. Now install the 10mm bolt. Run it down with your fingers. Make sure the valve guide is flat in there. There you go. Torque this down to 106 inch-pounds. There we go. And then do that for all 4 of the bolts. What to do with that oil from the lifters? Dump it in the block. This way it washes down any particles and things get lubricated, and you're gonna have to drain this oil anyway. Don't even think about even starting this engine without changing the oil after this. Now just take a minute and spin the crankshaft around to make sure none of these lifters are binding. Some pressure on them. Feel them rise and fall like they're supposed to. Everything looks good. Take these 4 dowel pins that might be stuck to the head. If they are, pull them out of the head because they have to go in the block. They won't do you any good if they're in the cylinder head, because the intention of these is to hold the gasket in place while you install the cylinder head, and they're also to locate the cylinder head, but